the Hawaii section of this program. So thanks to Anne and all of your companions. We hope your voices are loud and clear outside of NATO.
I think we are up and running about 1 minute early here. And thank you to Kathy Kelly and everyone who was part of part 5. And can we welcome Dave and Melody to unmute and introduce yourselves?
Aloha, Dave Malnick's here. I'm in beautiful Hawaii. I just want to thank you, David, for organizing this. This is amazing. It's been incredible. I also want to thank the International Peace and Bureau and World Beyond War for putting this on, touching people around the world. Anne Wright, without Anne Wright, this would have happened today here in Hawaii. And my wife, Sherry Pollack, who was instrumental in organizing this. I don't know if Melody's on yet. She was in another meeting, so she will be here pretty soon. But in the meantime, I'm going to fill in for her.
I'm here, Dave.
Oh, hey, great. Well, Melody,
I left the other meeting early.
Okay, Melody. Oh, well, okay. Anyway, my name is Dave Malnick, and I'm a co-founder of the Greenpeace here in Hawaii, 350 Hawaii, our Revolution Hawaii, and the Hawaii Climate and Environmental Coalition. Been an activist in peace and justice for, oh my God, over 60 years. And it's been a while. So let me introduce to you our main host of the program here, Melody Aduba.
Thank you, Dave. And thank you, David Swanson. And thank you to Anne Wright for inviting Dave and I to participate in this peace wave. It's wonderful. This is my backyard. Aloha from Hawaii. This is Kahalu'u. David and I, we both live in Kahalu'u. Okay, so my name again is Melody Aduha. I am the co-chair of the Environmental Caucus of the Democratic Party of Hawaii. I'm also with Dave, co-chairs of the Hawaii Climate and Environmental Coalition. I'm also with him in the Greenpeace Hawaii chapter, and I'm also a plaintiff in Waiola Alliance, which is a citizen suit under RCRA, Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, and Clean Water Act against the Department of Defense, the Navy, for its contamination to our sole source aquifer through its underground storage facility called Red Hill. I'm a former state senator as well as a retired attorney. And so it is a pleasure to be here with all of you today. This is a very important topic. And Dave, we together and many others, activists here in Hawaii, we share this anti-militarism sentiment, which we will fight until the end. Okay, David.
Okay. Really, we will not quit until we can end war. The United States is we're in a bad shape here. The United States weapons is our #1 product. I don't know if you knew that. That's the #1 thing we sell around the world. We sell war. That is our product. The U.S. military is the biggest polluter in the world and also the biggest user of fossil fuels, and is the major instrumental in causing a growing climate catastrophe that's coming up here. That's coming up to us very quickly. And I just want to give a shout out to all the people on this, and especially here in the Pacific now, because we're dealing with us, who are standing up to the injustice of the military-industrial complex. It is virtually evil because it has only one goal, is to make itself stronger. When they talk about national defense, they're talking about protecting their different services. They're not talking about protecting you and me. Otherwise, you'll see from these different stories that the military is responsible for poisoning its own people, even its own military personnel. And it's pretty shocking how flippant they are and then concerned about the real people they're supposed to be protecting. But the people on the front lines know very well that they are not protecting them. They're actually the ones who are abusing them. So I'm going to go with our first video here. This is from Hawaii Peace and Justice Liberation Camp. This is between March 16 to 18, 2023. Youth across Oahu participated in the Hawaii Peace and Justice Youth Liberation Camp, where they received political education on history of Hawaii, environmental racism, climate justice, and began thinking about how to organize their own grassroots campaign. was a great kickoff for Hawaii Peace and Justice, developing programs that have provided these youth an opportunity to engage in the difference between participating and organizing, gaining training skills necessary to build for the issues that matter to them. So we're going to do video 6.2, and this is a great opportunity to we got to teach our youth that it's up by and for the people, and they need to participate, and they can make a difference. So if you could play. What happened? Lost their audio. Except as hard as it goes.
With the Hawaii Peace and Justice Youth Liberation Camp, we strive to cultivate a safe space where young, aspiring community organizers can learn how to effectively unite together to enact change. Over the course of 3 days, we take our students on a huaka'i to learn movement building for ea through popular education workshops and aina-based education. The curriculum for our workshops are based on our lived realities in Hawaii, including but not limited to reclaiming ea, environmental racism, climate justice, imperialism, and the military-industrial complex. By providing them with these tools and language around what they're subjected to, we can better support them in what they're fighting for, what we're up against, and work with them to build their own grassroots campaigns and long-term strategies.
Being at the Youth Liberation Camp made me feel seen and heard. That's a part of why I believe spaces like this are so important for Native youth, because we live in a society that's so quick to write us off and put us aside. We just learn not to ask questions, that our voices are only one of many, and that there's no way that we individually can make any change. And that might be true, but our singular voices can come together as a lahui through deliberate organization, through education, through asking questions. It's important for us to be knowledgeable and to know our history, so that we can maybe have a fighting chance at creating voices that won't be ignored, that can be heard.
That's beautiful. Youth are our future, and our Hawaii youth are particularly important because we have that added advantage of culture, and culture is very more important in strengthening and working together. And so we're very excited about our Hawaii youth and training them on how to organize. Melody?
Yeah, I think that's great. They need to learn this because we can only go so far, and they need to carry on. And getting them started at such a young age, such a tender age, the Waipio, they really need to learn the history and how to cultivate it, because the history, our history is our future. Our history is their future. And so this is a great program. We need to teach them. There are so many things involved, and they're just learning from the grassroots. But there's more. There's process, the legalities, the International Court of Appeals. It has to go beyond the U.S. And the youth have the strength, the energy, the hunger. Let them go. Teach them and let them grow. Okay. Next we have video 6.3. And this one will turn our attention to an example of the devastating impacts of colonialism and militarism that have had on that we have had in our islands and on the contamination of our sole source aquifer. I had mentioned this earlier. On the island of Oahu as a result of negligence by the U.S. Navy at the Red Hill Bulk Fuel Storage Facility. Today, we will hear from Wayne Tanaka, Executive Director of Sierra Club Hawaii, who will provide an update of this existential crisis and the status of defueling of the Red Hill jet fuel tanks. Take it away.
Aloha mai kako. My name is Wayne Tanaka. I am the Executive Director of the Sierra Club of Hawaii here in the U.S.-occupied Kingdom of Hawaii on the island of Oahu, today in the moku of Ko'olaupoko. I am here to provide an update on our efforts to protect our island's sole source aquifer, in other words, our primary drinking water source from the U.S. Navy's Red Hill Bulk Fuel Storage Facility. It's been 1 year and 9 months after the facility's most recent major leak poisoned thousands of military and civilian families and left 5,000 gallons of jet fuel, antifreeze, and other additives in our once pure aquifer. And as we speak, we still have over 100 million gallons of jet fuel in this facility's massive World War II era underground storage tanks, which are located just 100 feet above the groundwater that we depend upon for our neighborhoods, for our hospitals, our schools, our hotels, every aspect of life as we know it here on Hawaii's most populous island. In the past year and 9 months, we have not been quiet. We have taken to the streets. We have lobbied our elected officials across the political spectrum and at every level, from our city officials to our state legislators to our congressional delegation. We have camped at the entrance to Pacific Base Command headquarters and marched to the doorstep of the Navy facilities and engineering command offices. And this has been a truly unifying campaign. We've had office workers, construction workers, retirees, teachers, students, hotel employees, lawyers, doctors, gang members, military families, and demilitarization advocates, all standing together, people from all walks of life, to take a stand for water and the future of our island and all who would call this precious place home. And so much of this has been led by Kanaka Oiwi and supported by allies, including our Shimanchu and Chamorro friends, whose ancestral lands in Okinawa and Guam have also been poisoned by U.S. military's negligence and malfeasance. And so fortunately, because of this unprecedented historic movement to protect our island, to protect our water and our future from any further harm, we have been able to get the U.S. Pentagon to order the Red Hill facility to be defueled and shut down permanently. And to this end, the Pentagon has established a multi-branch military task force dedicated to expediting the 200 critical repairs that were apparently needed just to safely defuel this facility. Despite the lies the Navy had been telling us for years about how this facility was operated and maintained above and beyond industry and regulatory standards. The Navy has also vowed to remove the 3 major fuel pipelines connected to this facility, which would help to prevent it from ever being used to store fuel or other hazardous materials again in the future. Of course, whether they will follow through on this remains to be seen. While we have achieved major victories in this campaign to save our island, we are still far from home in this crisis. Beyond the 104 million gallons of fuel that still threaten to destroy life as we know it here on Oahu and likely throughout Hawaii, the fuel that is already in our aquifer will place us at risk of potential water shortages that will impact our neighborhoods, impact our schools, our businesses, our ways of life for years to come. And it will take years and millions upon millions of dollars to develop the monitoring wells to track this toxic plume and ensure it doesn't reach any of the other wells that we are now relying upon and which we are at risk of overpumping due to the loss of our major wells near the Red Hill facility. We have also learned that the Red Hill facility has released thousands of gallons of firefighting chemicals containing what are known as PFAS, which are these incredibly toxic forever chemicals in no less than 3 incidents over the last 4 years. And we still have not been provided any plans to identify and contain these forever chemicals that could now threaten our children, our grandchildren, those who are born well after our own lives have passed. And we also still have no on-island water testing facility to determine whether the water we drink continues to be safe in a timely manner. Residents whose water has been potentially contaminated by these PFAS forever chemicals from other military facilities on Oahu have been told that they must wait for 3 months for water lab results from the US continent. EPA officials, they consider waiting 3 months to know if you're poisoning your family or yourself to be timely, and so have refused to join our cause to have the Department of Defense pay for an on-island water testing facility. And too many people who have been poisoned are still gravely sick. Many are now on the brink of poverty in trying to deal with their health issues after military doctors refuse to provide them with any meaningful guidance in trying to deal with their health issues, in trying to monitor health and seek ways to heal themselves from their exposure to the concoction of toxic chemicals in the water that they had used to drink, to cook, to bathe in. Unfortunately, their numbers may be growing because despite hundreds of reports of intermittent feel-like sheens and other indications of contamination in the Navy's water lines, and as well as ongoing symptoms from those using the water from the Navy's water system, the Navy continues to tell their water customers that the water is safe to drink. So again, while we have made historic progress, we know that there is little time to rest on our laurels. Beyond the Red Hill crisis, there are lands and water sources across Hawaii that have been contaminated by U.S. military actions, and that we need to be remediated if we want to ensure a food and water secure future for our children. And the environment is not the only way we're being impacted by the U.S. military's presence. We have issues with local residents not being able to compete with the incredibly high housing alliances that allow non-resident military officials to take up our rental housing market and even buy and flip our housing and our land for profit. Local organizations are still fighting to get data from the Department of Defense to understand the impact of the military's presence on social issues such as human trafficking, which data indicates may be disproportionately impacting Native women and girls, and even after local police stings have netted a disproportionate number of active duty service members soliciting minors for sex. Our work is cut out for us, but importantly, we are realizing that if we want to address all of these issues, we cannot do it alone. We must work with other similarly affected communities across Oceania, including in places like Okinawa, like Guam, like the Philippines, Saipan, and just too many others. And so that we can raise our collective voices and raise the consciousness of people across the United States and throughout the world regarding the need for systemic changes to rein in the Department of Defense before its actions erode away the very things that we need to survive. And so with that, thank you for tuning in. For more info about the Red Hill situation, you can visit sierraclubhawaii.org/Red Hill, or follow Sierra Club HI on Instagram or on Twitter. Please reach out to us also at hawaii.chapter@sierraclub.org. That's hawaii.chapter@sierraclub.org if you'd like to connect on any of these issues. Mahalo nui for listening, and take care. Aloha.
Okay, sorry. Wayne Tanaka is amazing. He's an activist for peace and justice and protecting our water supply. The military talks about national security. Once again, they're talking about protecting their own service and their own ability to rise up in ranks. They are not working to protect our national security, which is our drinking water. They are the biggest polluters in the country. All of our major sites here that are polluted in Hawaii are because of the military. All the majority of Superfund fights are military. So, Melody's been very active on Red Hill. Do you want to say anything briefly about Red Hill, Melody?
Yeah, we've been fighting and trying to warn the public for the last, I would say, since 2017, when I became active in this issue. And it wasn't until this spill in November 2021 that the military did wake up. The elected officials did wake up. And of course, more community members join into the fight to close down Red Hill. But that's, as Wayne said, that's like over almost close to 2 years ago, and it's still filled with 104 million gallons of fuel. And this is 20 large underground fuel storage tanks. It's amazing how they built these tanks back in World War II. They're 80-year-old tanks. They were made in a way where there was no EPA at that time, and building it 100 feet above a sole source aquifer just was nonsensical, very dangerous to the human health, to the environment, and unfortunately, those that suffered the most are military servicemen, servicewomen, and their families. So who's protecting who? They can't even protect themselves. So, I mean, we are in Hawaii, the main Camp Smith, it's the epicenter of the Indo-Pacific Command. Everything stems from Oahu, up in Aiea, up where Red Hill is located. Everything that happens in the Pacific Basin with China, with North Korea, all of that will stem from Hawaii. It is very important, and it's unfortunate that the federal government, the US government, is putting so much emphasis on the militarism in Hawaii versus helping the indigenous Kanaka Maoli. A lot of them are homeless, a lot of them houseless, a lot of them are suffering from addiction, a lot of them are in jail, unfortunately, a big percentage. There is so much discrimination where that money that is going to the military should actually be helping the host community. So that's another issue that we will be, that we are challenged with. And hopefully now with the closure of Red Hill, and it's taken years, like I had mentioned, it's 80-year-old fuel tanks. And again, with the environmental justice, all of the other similarly situated underground storage fuel tanks in the west coast of the continent have been closed, have been built with state-of-the-art above-ground tanks. Hawaii, in all of its importance, we were not afforded that type of benefit. And now we've got 93 people who are at risk. Many of them have filed personal injury suits against the United States, against the Department of Defense, because of their lingering chronic physical health illnesses that they are suffering from petroleum contamination, from having have consumed this water, bathed in it, drank it, washed clothes in it, cooked with it. And the Navy, in the initial stages, they denied the toxicity of the water. They said, no, it is safe to drink. They failed to warn, and they lied. So now we've got 93,000 people that are at risk. And when you look at how the underground aquifer operates, it serves the greater part of the island of Oahu. So now you're not just looking at the Navy's water supply, but you are looking at the sole source aquifer that fuels, that serves over 400,000 individuals in the county, city and county of Honolulu, from Moanalua to Hawaii Kai. That includes Honolulu, includes Waikiki, includes our second major industry, tourism. Our first is military, our second is tourism. So there you have it. Thank you.
Thank you, Melody. So Jane Goodall travels around the world, and she got from youth all around the world that they were very concerned that they're not going to have a future due to climate change. And so youth like Greta Thunberg sat by herself all alone in front of their legislature there, and said, hey, I'm concerned. And she's actually started a movement of youth, and that it is spreading, and a lot of youth activists are standing up and taking control and trying to have some effect on what's been going on. Here in Hawaii, we have a lawsuit, Napahini, versus the Hawaii Department of Transportation. Our Hawaii Department of Transportation has been moving at a snail's pace, moving away from fossil fuel vehicles and moving towards electric vehicles. In fact, they're just not putting enough charging stations out there. So people can buy a car, but they can't charge it. And so it's a big problem. And but our youth here in Hawaii have gotten together and are suing the Hawaii Department of Transportation. So here we have on this next video, we've got Dyson Chi. He's And just, we went down there to support them, and they were protesting the Hawaii Department of Transportation, demanding that they stop, supporting fossil fuels and start supporting transportation that is electrified. So this is video 6.4, Dave.
We're here today because our future is facing an existential crisis. We're facing the climate crisis. Now, there are two reasons why we're here today. One is that President Biden has pledged throughout his campaign and his time in office to be a climate president. And he is not on track to be a climate president. He is on track to be a president that is all about oil extraction, that is about fossil fuel extraction. And we are here to hold him accountable to his word, because ultimately a president needs to follow through with his words. Otherwise, he is just an empty shell of himself. Secondly, we're here because of the Navahine versus DOT case. Again, with accountability and following through with your commitments. DOT building is right behind us. And DOT has been mandated by the state legislature to meet a variety of climate goals. Instead of transportation emissions going down, though, transportation emissions here have been going up. And that's the wrong direction. So we're here to also hold DOT accountable to ensure that they are building a future, literally building a future, that is just and equitable and resilient for us. So that is why we're here today, and we will be here until these issues are resolved and until President Biden and the DOT follow through with their promises and meet the goals that they have said that they would do. So, everyone, on the count of 3, let's do a chant. Let's do climate action now. Y'all ready? All right, on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Climate action now! Climate action now! Climate action now! Let's do this, everyone! We can have climate action now! Hell yeah! Woo!
Dyson just graduated from college. He started out in high school as an activist, and he is going to get more involved in helping to protect our planet. The next two are up to you, Melody.
Well, I just wanted to make a comment that air transportation is such a large part of the greenhouse gas emissions of all of the planes that come and go from Hawaii, especially from military, as well as the tourism industry. It's really hard for us to even get a grasp as to how much greenhouse gases are being emitted by air transportation. And so this is a very important lawsuit that the youth have filed in order to determine and hopefully somehow be able to press for the reduction of such greenhouse gas emissions. As you all know, everyone wants to visit Hawaii. It's the most beautiful state in the United States, and it makes it easy for them to travel here. But unfortunately, our greenhouse gas footprint is huge. And until there's more EV ways as to how air transportation can carry through, then we are really at odds with this climate crisis. Okay, moving on to 6.5. Who is the military keeping safe? Nobody. There's no security without clean water. Drawing the connections of the U.S. military threat and harms perpetuated to drinking water in both Hawaii and Guam, we hear from Nayek Flores, a member of Putehi Letiquan, Save, Retidian, and Independent Guam. Take it away.
Aloha, hapade, everybody. My name is Nayek Flores, and I'm a member of Putehi Letiquan, Save, Retidian, and Independent Guam. and I live in Guam. And last week when we heard about this recent contamination, the spill of 1,300 gallons of AFF, it was with a great sense of urgency that we felt the need to actually come here to stand in solidarity. And so we are tremendously humbled to be here with all of you today, to stand in solidarity with all of you. We have this banner here. It says, Lena'la Ihanam, water is life in Chamorro. And this is a miniature version of the giant banner we held at our Red Hill Solidarity event a year ago. 1 year ago, at home, we had a solidarity event for Red Hill, and we couldn't bring that banner. So my friend Joey Certeza made this just the day before we left. Right now, our group is involved in a similar fight. We have a sole source aquifer that is extremely vulnerable to military contamination. A firing range being constructed where they will fire off 7 million ammunitions a year right over our aquifer. Just a couple years ago, we had a jet fuel spill which destroyed 500 tons of soil. This is horrible destruction that will impact many, many generations from now. Right now, our group is fighting open burning and open detonation, again, on ancestral land. We are all sick and tired. Who are they keeping safe? Who are they keeping safe? Nobody. We have a common enemy. We have a common enemy. This hazardous waste, we didn't put it here. The military put it here. The colonizer put it here. It's time to demilitarize the Pacific, decolonize Oceania, and we are stronger together. We are stronger as a Pacific family. Thank you all so much, Sainamasi. I send so much Gwenaiza, Bula Gwenaiza from Guam to every single one of you. Sainamasi, everybody.
Oh my, Tafade, Toto Malik, to our brothers and sisters, our Chamorro brothers and sisters in Guam. It's so heartfelt. It's like, wow, it's what is happening in Hawaii is happening over there. And I know a lot of our military servicemen from the Marine base in Kaneohe Bay have gone to Guam. They're being deployed there, and live fire, as we have seen, and all of the lead and mercury, and it's just really sad. And again, it's over their aquifer. It's just unbelievable as to how reckless, how negligent, and how much disregard the military has for ancestral land. It's just breaks my heart. Okay, moving on. So 6.6. Next, we'll hear reflections from a representative of the Women's Voices, Women Speak delegation to the International Women Against Militarism's meeting, which was held on May 2023 in the Philippines. Okay, take it away.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ihilani Lasquenya. I'm from Waimanalo, Oahu in the occupied Hawaiian Kingdom, and I'm a part of Women's Voices, Women Speak, and Affirm Hawaii. So I've been asked to share some of my reflections on the trip that I went to the Philippines with the International Women's Network Against Militarism, and the gathering that we had there in Olongapo. And although there's many things I could say about this trip, one that was incredibly life-changing, not just as an organizer and activist, but as someone who's Filipina. I'll try and keep it as brief as possible because I know that there's a lot of ground that needs to be covered. So one of my first reflections and one of the things that I've learned is that you can be an independent country and a sovereign state while still seeing the remnants of colonization and imperialism within your own homeland. So being in Olongapo and learning the history about how the Philippine government and really like the people and the organizers and the activists were able to get the US military out of Olongapo and out of Subic Bay was incredible. But still seeing decades later, the remnants of militarization, whether it be the pollution in the water or presence of American men in the barrios, just looking at how patriarchy and the violence of imperialism still remains, and how America is still a really huge influence in the Philippines. So looking at how you can be an independent country, but this sphere of imperial influence doesn't end once you gain independence. And as someone who's Kanaka Maulian Filipino, looking at understanding sovereignty and fighting for decolonization in the Philippines as a sovereign state, and looking at Hawaii, who's fighting to be deoccupied and fighting to be free from the United States, and thinking about how an independent and free Hawaii is going to look without militarization. Because what good would it be if Hawaii were to be deoccupied tomorrow and we still kept a really strong relationship with our occupiers, if we still kept capitalism and all the ills and the hardships that we've endured because of colonization. So essentially looking at state-centric notions of sovereignty, understanding that just because you can be politically independent doesn't mean that history of imperialism cease to exist. And it's our job as a people, not even just as organizers, but a community, to come together to address these relationships and dream of an independent world that's not necessarily so state-centric, but one that's heavily dependent on our relationships to land and people. As one takeaway, I'm going to try and keep it short, but another reflection that I've had, and I really have to thank Cora and Margot for shaping my understanding of this. It's an understanding that anti-imperialism and demilitarization is an issue of class. So coming together as a group, something that has been made really clear to me, has really helped me to think about organizing in these issues is, in terms of global politics, oftentimes it's being framed as country to country relationships and decisions being made on the basis of a whole country, but having a capitalist or anti-capitalist analysis on the issues and understanding that it's the elites from each country who have a stronger loyalty to one another than the people of their own homelands. And I especially learned this from the American delegation that came down and really expressed how they have been harmed while still being in the imperial core. So understanding that imperialism and militarization is more of a struggle of elites trying to acquire as much capital and maintain as much power as they can, and how people from every homeland, whether you're colonized, occupied, or in the imperial core, are harmed because of the 1%. And so I know, again, still trying to keep this short, but those are just two really salient reflections that I've had upon this trip. This experience was one that I'll remember for the rest of my life, and I am who I am because of what I got to experience there on that Aina and with these people. Aina is in land. And last but not least, I really learned a lot about genuine security and what it means to show up for one another constantly. We've handled some tough situations regarding health and regarding COVID, but understanding that genuine security means that no one gets left behind and that we need to keep each other safe, not even in a metaphorical sense, but literally. So being reminded that the COVID-19 pandemic is still ongoing, it's more of an epidemic now, but as organizers and specifically as feminists, how do we keep each other safe while still doing movement work? And so those are my 3 reflections. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope to see you all soon. Take care, and aloha.
I'm just awestruck by how brilliant, how eloquent she spoke. Our next presentation is on Makua Valley. Makua Valley is one of those places that the military has contaminated with the shelling. They came in around World War II, and the people had lived in there for a couple thousand years, and they said, "You're leaving. We're taking the valley." They gave them $100 for their house, their land, and forced them out. And that was it. Took it. It's never been given back, and they contaminated it with weapons, shelling it constantly. 3 of my greatest friends, Kyle Kajihiro, Lynette Cruz, and Sparky Rodriguez, are going to discuss land back in Makua Valley. We're only going to watch the first 20 minutes because we're getting a little behind time. It's on the internet. It's called Makua, a Pico of Peace. So we're just going to watch the first 20 minutes of this, and they'll discuss what's like organizing against this behemoth, the military, and trying to protect their rights and their land.
So aloha mai kākou. Welcome to all of our viewers out there with the Global Peace Wave and watching from wherever you are. Welcome to our session, which is titled Makua, a Pico of Peace, and we'll explain what that title means. My name is Kyle Kajihiro, I'm the president of Hawaii Peace and Justice, and we are one of the co-sponsors of this session. I also am an assistant professor in ethnic studies at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. And prior to that, I used to be a program coordinator for the American Friends Service Committee in Hawaii. And I've been involved in working with Makua Valley, trying to get the military to clean up and return the land since about 1996 when I was working for the American Friends. And so I've been on and off the board of Malama Makua now also for a number of years. So tonight we're having just a talk story, a conversation about Makua Valley, one of these beautiful lands in Hawaii that have been seized by the U.S. military and have been abused as a training site for America's wars. And we're going to talk with a couple of other leaders of Malama Makua, one of the main groups that has been working for a long time to secure the protection and return of Makua Valley as a place of peace and a place for Hawaiian culture to thrive. So I'm here tonight with Lynette Cruz, who's the president of the board. Yeah, Lynette, still yet?
Yes.
and Sparky Rodriguez. I don't know. You have a title, Sparky?
No, member.
Yes, member, but long time.
Member,
long
past
time.
president.
Yeah. He's
Maybe
been
future
the
president.
he's been the foundation of Malama Makua for a long time. So yeah, welcome and thank you both for making time to come and share a little update about Makua Valley. I wonder if you would like to just say a little bit more about yourselves and your background and involvement with Makua.
I am retired, retired teacher from Hawaii Pacific University. Well, actually, I'm still on faculty there and retired from the York Community College, where I taught for a few years after I moved to the West Side. Busy, but unpaid. Volunteer work nowadays.
Yeah, Sparky Rodriguez, part of the founding members of Malama Makua, and we started from two separate groups. One was a homeless Hawaiian group that was on the beach battling the state, and then the other group was a peace and justice group that we ended up meeting together at the front gate of Makua. And that was really the beginning of Malama Makua, and working on the understanding of how government, military, and capitalism really affects land use, poverty, homelessness, and our economics. So in the background of the lady with the hat on and the stick, that's my wife. She passed several years ago. This is one of our accesses that we have going into Makua to demonstrate the value of the cultural presence that was there for centuries, if not longer, and how the military has abused, desecrated cultural sites and without any accountability. So that's kind of where we started.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And that site is that's the Ki'ipohaku, yeah, that's a petroglyph rock that we're stopping at. So if you look really carefully, I think you can maybe make out some of the images of humans and dogs and other creatures there. So it's yeah, it's a very special place. And in my background also is a view from the mountains looking down into Makua Valley. And so to just situate folks who may not be familiar, Makua is on the west side of Oahu in the Waianae Coast. It's one of the last ahupua'a or land divisions before you get to the western tip of the island. And it's one of the last intact valleys where you can go from the tip of the ridge of the mountain all the way down to the sea and out into the ocean, which is undeveloped. And also a site that was taken by the U.S. military, one of many sites. So we'll get into that history in a little bit. Do anyone want to say a little bit about just some of what's the general history and what's special about Makua Valley?
Well, for generations, Hawaiians lived there. It was a secluded valley, and you could not get there unless you walked along the shoreline or came in by canoe. So it was more of a Shangri-La type of place where the people that lived there was very secluded from the outside world. And the streams flowed, and they had dry land forests, but they also had streams flowing that would end up feeding their lo'i, which was a primary food source, as well as sweet potato and a whole bunch of other things that they used to survive. And after the overthrow, one of the things that happened is that the military, the US government, ended up having a very aggressive effort of occupation. And they would go around the island and just basically take over. So a lot of the questions that I have is, how did they get this land? How did they get the leases? And what did they do to force the government at the time to give leases out? And Makua Valley was being used by the military in the late 1920s. And the lease ends in 2029, so that's 100 years. But the lease was not signed until 1964. So it was a 65-year lease. They could do whatever they wanted to. They promised to return it, actually, after World War II to the people that were living there. But since then, they've claimed all of those properties as theirs in fee. And that basically evicted all of the people, a lot of them at gunpoint.
Yeah. So just to give a little context to that history you were sharing, because that's really important. So the Makua Valley is about what, like 4,000 something acres altogether?
It's about 6,000.
Oh, 6,000. Okay. And all of that land, most of it, except for a few small parcels towards the coastline, were the government lands of the Hawaiian Kingdom before the U.S. Backed the overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom and then later seized Hawaii. And so those kingdom lands are still disputed till today. There's what, like 2 million acres or something of Hawaiian Kingdom lands that include many of the public spaces like airports and harbors and whatever the state runs, and much of the military and federal lands come out of this government land of the Hawaiian Kingdom. So Makua is mostly all government lands, and the upper portion, I guess from about here back to the mountainside, are lands that they claim to control through an executive order of the president. That happened after World War II, where they said, okay, we're going to use Makua for training, and they just issued an order and took it and evicted all the families. But the lower third of the valley towards the coastline and out to the shore was supposedly returned to the state of Hawaii as a trustee for these government crown lands, and but simultaneously leased, right, to the Army in 1964 for a 65-year lease, and for the whopping price of $1.
$1 for all 65 years.
$1 for 65 years.
The insult is for 100 years, just $1. Yeah. And they don't have to clean up their mess.
Yeah. So this is part of the outrage, the kind of the hidden violence of militarization in Hawaii, is that beautiful places like this are bombed and burned and then used as a training site and littered with unexploded ordnance. So it's literally a minefield there. Did you have some thoughts about the history you'd like to share, Lynette?
Not really. I want to talk about how when we early on, after Malawa Makua was formed, there was a lot of tension between us and the military. And whenever we went in for an access, which we got because Malawa Makua sued the Army, And the result of that was accesses 2 times a month and some overnights and makahiki and other kinds of things like that. But I remember going in early in the day, and I think they really hated us. They're really not too friendly. That's okay. I mean, we have to work it out, I guess. And I guess I'm bringing that up now because things have changed. They don't hate us so much, or if they do, they keep it to themselves. And so our relationship has changed, and I'm going to assume that we're moving in the direction of explaining how that happened.
Yes, absolutely. Let's kind of pivot towards that. So Malama, you mentioned the lawsuit. In 1998, right? Malama Makua sued the Army for failing to do an adequate environmental impact study of their activities there. And in 2001, there was a settlement agreement where the Army promised to do a thorough study within 3 years. And then all these conditions were added, including recognizing Malama Makua as a cultural group that had rights to these twice a month cultural access to the valley. And they promised to clean up some sites, to do additional studies, but they failed, right? Wasn't it? They failed to complete the EIS within the time frame.
Yeah.
And so 2004, was it? The court issued a injunction on live fire training.
Well, the Army wanted to renegotiate and say, well, let's go ahead and just go back to training. And the judge actually told them that they received the benefit of the agreement and we were still waiting for our turn. And part of that was all the cultural sites that had been desecrated and bombed and blown up, like the Wakaki'i behind me, there's bullet holes in it. So part of the training activity has created a lot of that conflict. And initially the Army said there's no cultural sites in Makua. And then there would be a huge fire at exposing these sites. So they couldn't deny it anymore. And it took years for us to educate them. And part of the fires would burn through cultural sites, but also through critical habitat for all the endangered species. There's about 44 endangered species, I believe, in the valley. So there's a lot that have been discovered over the last 20-something years. And now they're taking care of them. But it wasn't for the lawsuit. And the lawsuit came about by a fire that ultimately burned through some of the endangered species and destroyed them, burnt them all. So Fish and Wildlife was another agency that was complicit in allowing the Army to do the training and the destruction of the land that ended up taking a lot of endangered species.
Thank you. That's an important history to remember, that it took
Sorry,
community...
I distracted a little bit.
No. But it was really the F-Suits folks that pushed to make sure that the Army was now doing environmental restoration, putting up fences, like snail cages, snail enclosures, right? All of these things. I mean, there's some real gems, real treasures all up in this upper area where we're looking down from. So let's talk about then, how did Malama Makua begin to shift its mission and vision of organizing that Lynette was referring to? Can you talk more
Early
about
on, early on, the mission of Malama Makua was to Malama Makua, basically, and however that looked. And so mostly through accesses and teaching people about what was required for us to Malama Makua. I mean, how do you do that? If you don't have access, except occasionally, and the Army is like everywhere with you when you're in the valley. It's not so easy to malama. You got to malama from afar. And I think we're getting discouraged. I mean, truth. People were starting to look at us as at Makua as a kind of tourist destination. I mean, you never been to Makua? Yes, just call these guys or let's take a hike. We're gonna go hiking. And we had several groups coming in specifically because they wanted to do a tour or take a hike with us. And for a while we actually did that, but it was kind of discouraging. That's
Yeah.
not what we were there for. And
Mhm.
so we were trying to figure out what we should do. And then I think last year, 2022, maybe before that, we decided it might be time to change our mission statement. And I think it was really well received by the older board members. I know that Karen Young was really happy that we would shift focus and look at peace. What is it that we want? What does it mean if we're going to Malama Makua? What does that mean? And so we shifted our mission. And now it's, as I recall, because you were present in that discussion, we Malama Makua as a piko of peace and ho'i ho'i ea. And so a center of peace and restored sovereignty, independence, life, bread. And when that happened, the way we approach the work changed, and it just came. This is all like during and right after the COVID. Then the Army locked us out, basically. We couldn't go in and we didn't know what to do. But after we shifted the mission to look at the center, if we cannot get to the center, what can we do? Well, it radiates out. We started doing all this other stuff, and it's been crazy and good.
I just wanted to maybe explain some of the imagery of the Hawaiian terms in there, because I think it's really powerful for folks that might not know. So Pico is like your navel or the center. It's a place that connects you to past, present, and future generations. So if Makua is a Pico, is a place that is also, it's connecting to the past, but it's also giving birth and connecting us to future generations. So what is that legacy? And not only in time, but also in space, right? Because it connects us to other people around the world who have a stake in peace.
We've hosted thousands, I believe, of people over the last 20 years to come into Makua. And everyone had their own agenda. But the idea was that initially, because the military, their mission is to train for war. Battle, using their weapons to kill, and to meet their own agenda and their mission. So initially, we tried to get them to explain to us what culture are they protecting, and we didn't really understand what that meant, because we found out that their culture, Army culture, is what they're protecting. Hawaiian culture, not so much. So within that, they came to Makua to train for war. Our efforts to go to Makua was to create that Pico, or the center of the universe, for peace. And within that discussion and that thought, how do we restore all the dryland forests? How do we rehabilitate and get our native forests back, but also the critical habitat for the endangered species? When Leandra and I, my wife and I started, we looked for help to help the Hawaiians gain access to the cultural sites. And what happened is that there's no assistance within the judiciary or government for Hawaiians to have access. So what happened is that we found that the laws support endangered species and critical habitat. So the direction of our effort went to support the Hawaiians without a voice, the endangered species, the Hawaiians without a voice. And that is what helped us get past that feeling of being taken advantage of. But once we did that, they had no defense. Once we went from let's get the valley back and restore it to Pico of Peace, now they have no defense. This is not about war. This is not about training or destruction. It is about protecting the land, the water, the endangered species, so that we all have a place to heal, but also to have peace. And that's something we might be able to train. We've been training the military, and we've asked, when we do our gathering, we normally do a debrief at the end. And one of the colonels who joined us actually
Great. This video is available online. It's a 51-minute video about Makua Valley. Thank you, David, for stopping when you did. We want to make sure that we don't impact on the next group coming up after ours. So it's called Makua, a Pico of Peace. Sherry's dropping the link to in the chat, and I encourage you to watch it. Thank you, Lynette and Sparky and Kyle, for your decades of efforts to protect the culture on our planet. And I turn it over to Melody for our last set of videos.
Okay, thank you very much, Dave. Okay, we now move to Guam with a chant giving thanks to our creator, and it will follow with Pacifica Solidarity from the Love of Water series and a short film addressing militarization in the Pacific, impacts to our water, and frontline resistance efforts. So this is 6.8 video.
Aday ini Zaguahan, Inan si Jeremy Cepeda, Zaninigui si Dakota Komatsu, and we're very happy today to participate in the Digital Peace Wave that is being sponsored by the International Peace Bureau. So today we would like to share a chant with you in our native language, Ifino Hadza, and it's about giving thanks to our Creator, to praise the Creator and give honor for all the great things that have been given to us. Man etnun hit wini pagu natatuna siya saina izahululu lui gefinatina siha lui lina lota lui zahita lui manyai nata lui pahota siha lui quina hota san hokuku kazuniha nagwa Lina laihanum inigui ifinalofonya ihanum.
As Pacific peoples, we have a deep and sacred connection to water. Yet all around the Pacific, communities are on the ground organizing to protect this life-giving source in a fight for our lives. I spent the last year on a journey through the Mariana Islands and to Oahu, Hawaii, documenting indigenous resistance against U.S. imperialism in protection of water. In their homelands, I spoke with protectors who remind us not only of the deep importance of water for our very survival, but share the ways that water is embedded in our language and life ways.
So I'm about to get on a flight to Saipan and meet with some of the activists, some community members, to see how they feel about the ways that the military expansion is impacting the region. It's important to note that the military expansion that's currently happening, you can see so much of those realities here in Guam, but it's not just Guam being impacted. There are just under 1 million square nautical miles of ocean that are being used for training exercises by the U.S. military. When I arrived in Saipan, I connected with members of our Commonwealth 670, a grassroots community group doing critical work drawing attention to military training as part of the Mariana Islands Training and Testing Area, or MITS, which is close to 834 million acres of open ocean around the Mariana Islands and near the Hawaii Range Complex, used for military live fire ordnance testing and training and deadly sonar activities. OCW 670's Kathy and Zeno discussed the group's efforts to de-escalate militarization and conduct educational outreach in the Marianas.
Since we first started getting environmental impact statements back in late 1990s, there has been an expansion in the region, how much land will be used, and also our waters that surround us, especially with the Marianas Island Training and Testing Area, which has expanded with all of our water resources around these islands. And it's really connecting a lot of the spaces between the islands.
To further understand the impacts of the expansion, I spoke with Master Dzawamti, or traditional healer, Saina Donald Mendiola, who expressed his concerns about the ways military training is harmful to Chamorro cultural systems, including millennia-old traditional healing practices.
Water means a lot of things in our culture. Even the ocean is armored. Actually, the ocean is armored for the body. When people are sick, sometimes the Dzawamti would take them to the ocean. And that's water. And we want to keep our water pure and clean. Even the ocean has to be clean because we take our patients, the Malong, to the ocean. We make them bathe. We put herbs and stuff on their bodies and we make them bathe. And so it has to be pure. It has to be just salt water, ocean water, and not chemicals added to it, because that would destroy the spirit of the healing from the ocean. And then if they're going to increase the militarization in the Pacific, it definitely is going to affect. It may not be tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, but down the generations. And that's what should not be happening. We have to protect the future generations from all that. We don't want anybody coming out of the ocean with rashes or cancers or sores or whatever due to our country, our United States, practicing on their weapons out there in the ocean, where we go out and we depend, and our ancestors have traditionally depended on the ocean for their livelihood, because they have the lemai, they have the suni, mindioka, and everything on land, but then they get their protein, most of their protein, from the ocean. And we don't want any toxified fish that we're going to intake into our body and to our system to make us sick.
Matua Council for Native Chamorro Advancement President Liana Hofschneider imparted wisdom about the importance of water to Chamorro lifeways and language. Her advocacy work stems from leaving the island to pursue higher education, then returning home to the realization that the interests of the Native peoples were not being prioritized.
I noticed that every time I come home, I noticed that a lot of things that are, critically important to us as Chamorros, as Native people here, become almost like a second priority. And it saddens me. So I believe that, having a focused voice on what are very important and essential to the survival of the Native people are the very core of this organization. So we do a lot of advocacy, and especially in public policy, and we so-called, so-called watchdog of, a lot of the public policies. Public policy really directly affects everything from, and especially our natural resources, and our access, to our natural resources and our access to, these sacred spaces. When I think about water, it's who we are. Water to me is life, linatla. The root word ha, it's life. Ha is hanum, hagung, your air, ha'uf, your chest where you breathe, right? That's breathing. And ha'i,
One issue of particular importance to Hofschneider in respect to the impacts of military training in the Marianas is the ongoing bombing of No'os, or Farallon de Manzanilla, a tiny uninhabited island north of Guam, less than 2 miles long and half a mile wide. The U.S. military has been bombing FDM for training purposes since 1971. Recently, it got permission to drop 4,000 more explosives there every year, along with tens and thousands more rounds of ammunition.
We all have to take our time when they're not testing to go and see how beautiful she is. Because the way they're doing it, I don't think the next generation would have the opportunity to know who and what No'os was. No'os to us is very important. It's our gathering place. And how do you transcribe that? If you go to Western Fisheries Management, those are the folks that look at our waters. You will see how important No'os is because it's a large spawning reef. That's where all the fishes, gather to reproduce and provide food for. And our ancestors are, know this. They've left some footprints. They don't tell us this. They don't even tell us in our books. The only thing we know is FDM, Farallon de Manzanilla, named after some Spanish, colonizer. But No'os is a very important bird, and we want to talk about that bird. It's an extinct bird. It probably has DNA somewhere, and that's what I want scientists to find out and help us find out where's this bird. Because when I talk about No'os, it's like a foreign language, but it's not. Our ancestors have provided us. They drew it in, pictographs and things like that. And so why am I very emotional when you ask that is because I know in the way they're doing their practice, because it's not only the U.S., it's their allies also practice there. Japan, everywhere. I mean, anyone that have an ally, they go and practice and they fly their jets from as far out in Iowa or Nebraska up here to test that pilot's endurance, and then bomb and then go back. We want to have a relationship with the United States. And part of that relationship is for security, national security. But I don't believe and I don't agree that we would have to compromise our health, our survival, because our health is our survival. The footprint of the military footprint on how it does its business on the island in a very fragile environment is another issue. And it's prevalent that when we talk about expansion, both in Tinian and here, in Rhoda, I haven't really heard much about, military expansion there. But in Tinian and here, the environment is like a second issue. It's always talked about how the economic benefits and all this and also of course national security, but they don't put a lot of emphasis, and correct me if I'm wrong, I challenge anyone to come out there and tell me publicly that they've put a lot of emphasis on how the environment is not going to be impacted or going to be impacted, and at what certain degree of that impact is, because I haven't seen and I haven't read, and that concerns.
I am against that. I am against militarization in the small islands in the Marianas, including Guam, because we're all Marianas. We're one Marianas. The islands are small enough as they are, and the islands won't get any bigger. We're in paradise. Well, maybe heaven, maybe better than paradise. And so we have to protect our culture. We have to protect our resources. We have to protect our inheritance from our ancestors.
In addition to MIT activities, groups in the Marianas are organizing to raise awareness about the effects of military actions in our home islands, from plans to establish a series of live fire training ranges, high caliber live fire and maneuver training, bombing in the land, waters, and airspace in Pagan and Tinian, islands north of Guam in the Commonwealth of the Northern Marianas. These training activities are called the Commonwealth Joint Military Training, or CJMT plans.
We're still waiting for the CJMT, the Commonwealth Joint Military Training, the next EIS to come out. So it wasn't stopped. It's going to be proposed again. And again, the public is just really concerned that how many comments do you need before you realize that this is not a livable situation. We're 184 square miles of terrestrial land. We only have so many acres that you can grow food on. You only have so many acres to collect water, to recharge your aquifers. What's it going to take to go, this is too small of a land mass with limited natural resources. This is too much of an impact, and especially for the indigenous people here.
And there's something to be said about, you know, a lot of departments and agencies try to find a compromise between, you know, local indigenous interests and the military. And usually compromise is a very good formal way of like getting things done and moving forward. But when you think about the sheer permanent impacts that, you know, these actions have on like land, resources, and people's livelihoods, compromise isn't enough. It's not going to cut it because what it's doing is so much more permanent and so much more harmful that doing a compromise is detrimental to the people who are most important, which is the people here.
We're discussing public trust. We thought during the NEPA process, we were actually getting good comments that would be accepted. And just repeatedly hearing no significant impact from what they proposed when you're talking live bombing ranges, live fire ranges. I mean, if a bomb doesn't cause irreparable damage, why is it being used as a weapon?
I visited David Henkin in Oahu, Hawaii, a senior attorney at Earth Justice who represented the Tinian Women's Association, Guardians of Ghani, Pagan Watch, and the Center for Biological Diversity in a lawsuit challenging destructive CNMI joint military training plans.
Started proposing moving Marines to Guam, they were saying, oh, we can just continue with what we've been doing in the past on Tinian, which is just small arms fire, so target practice basically with bullets. And then they actually discounted any possibility of doing training in Pagan, saying it's too far away, it's too remote, we won't do anything there. Then, after they made the decision to move the Marines to Guam, they come out with this draft environmental impact statement for their training in the Northern Marianas that suddenly revealed that what they actually wanted to do was turn Tinian and Pagan into major war zones. So on the island of Tinian, it wouldn't just be limited to bullets. It would be mortars and artillery, and there'd be aerial gunships and amphibious landings that would damage the coral reefs there. Up in Pagan, the situation would be even more dire. They were basically looking at the island, forgetting about the indigenous people, forgetting about the families that call that island home, seeing that it's temporarily unoccupied because of the volcano and saying, okay, we're going to use this as our new target island. And they were going to do aerial bombardment and ship-to-shore shelling and amphibious assaults with live fire. And basically the entire northern part of the island, which is where the village was before the volcano, would be turned into an impact area. And when they examined that in the draft EIS, they said, oh, well, there won't be any impacts to people because there are no people there, forgetting about all the families who were eager to return home. So, you know, what really just struck me was the military's complete lack of transparency and honesty about what was in store for the Northern Marianas if Marines were going to be stationed in Guam.
In April of this year, the DoD threw out some of the proposed training plans for Pagan and Tinian after 27,000 comments were submitted as part of the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, process. NEPA requires federal agencies to examine the potential effects of their proposed actions on the human environment. Revised plans for the Northern Marianas have yet to be released.
It is definitely too soon to be popping any champagne over the changes in the Northern Marianas, because all we've seen so far is a press release from the governor of the Northern Marianas and a couple of vague statements at a public, press conference from the Navy. Until they actually release a new plan for the Northern Marianas, no one should feel comfortable that bombing Pagan and bombing Tinian are off the table. I mean, if there's one thing that my decades of litigation against the military have taught me, is that unfortunately, they really can't be believed. What they say one day can change 180 degrees to the next.
I traveled to Tinian to speak with community advocate Deborah Fleming with Tinian Women's Association, one of the plaintiffs in the Earth Justice case. She agreed that while some plans for the Northern Mariana Islands were revised, it's important for the community to continue to keep their ears to the ground.
And what we've always observed, that things change. And even with the TWA lawsuit, right? And it went up as high as the Ninth Circuit. To me, nobody won, nobody lost. But what it did is I believe it forced us locals, those are the who would be directly impacted, to be diligent in paying attention to what's happening. Put your ears to the ground and find out what's happening, so that in the event that, MIT, Merck, and oh my God, all those huge training plans, once they start being implemented, that we need to speak up, because that thing is still alive. We can still, then we need to, the next phase of trying to protect our environment. Yeah, because things are always changing. So that thing basically said, if the plan is so long and things are tend to change, then we're not going to enforce the full NEPA requirement. We're going to do it by phase as the need arises, as the change arises. That's what that meant. So your question, we have to be diligent.
Today, I went on to the CGMT EIS website to see, is there any announcement about when we're going to get a revised draft EIS? Because the last draft EIS said they were going to basically render life on Pagan impossible. Well, if they're serious about, scaling back the training so that we're only going to have training with bullets like we have historically on Tinian, and Pagans once again off the table, well, they need to tell us what the game plan is, and they have to do it not in press releases and in press conferences. So where is it that they're going to do it? And that's a question that the Navy just simply hasn't answered. It's like, well, where's that going to happen? Now, it may be that all of a sudden they've decided that all these things that are listed in their manual about what's necessary to be ready, that they've changed their minds, as I said, as they often do, from one day to the next. Something that was absolutely vital for national security becomes something that is antiquated, and we're going to move on from it. And so for years, people concerned about protecting their lands from the devastation that's associated with military live fire training have said, why can't you do more simulation? Why can't you get some of the training that way and spare us and spare our land the insult of all that military training? Now, I'd be thrilled if the Navy were to come forward and say, hey, we don't need to do any of that anymore. The Marines can be totally mission ready without doing it. But I am skeptical about their claims that all of a sudden that's off the table. I think that people should not be lulled into a false sense of complacency and say, hey, mission accomplished, because it hasn't been.
Now with the Ukraine-Russia war situation and where China, sits, it's making everybody nervous in the Pacific, and we should be.
While military and government officials have said plans for the Northern Marianas have been revised, construction on a divert airfield in Tinian continues, which poses a threat to Tinian's primary aquifer, nearshore environment, and the health of the general public, whose main water source will be compromised by a proposed fuel pipeline that would transport fuel to the airfield's fuel tanks. This airfield would be offered as an alternative to Andersen Air Force Base in Guam if Guam were to get attacked. The $161 million project is pegged for completion in 2025.
So you cut across perfectly beautiful property. You devalue it, especially with jet fuel. Even if it was going to be buried in the ground, how can you develop that land? You just devalued our land. Please change that. Just follow them all the way up and go up to your own property and make a line up there. And you can pollute your own property up there because it's already being polluted by all the flights that are going in and out, right?
They're proposing a pipeline to bring fuel from the port all the way to the airport. It's going to be an underground pipeline. The study that was used by the military was not founded a peer-reviewed study. It was actually a study that was with the Stratum Group, which is supported by funding from the Koch brothers, which of course support pipelines. And their statement was, this is safer than what they're using right now, which is transporting by truck. So we questioned that using just that study and other studies. And we also pointed out all these pipelines that have had damages and leaks. What's really detrimental for Tinian is this over their primary aquifer for their drinking water. So that's what we're concerned for Tinian. But we totally respect that the people on Tinian, they are also looking for ways to boost up their economy. And we're just there to support them for what they see as best for the community.
In all of their internal analyses, they looked at where are the alternate training locations if we have Marines based in Guam. And the answer to that was the Northern Marianas were the only feasible place to go. I mean, in theory, you have training areas in the continental United States where you can do all this training, but that's thousands and thousands of miles away. You do have training areas that they're currently using in Japan, but Japan is eager to, be done with that and has provided, at least as of that time, no assurances that Marines would have access to any of that training in mainland Japan. And sort of even through all the negotiations between Japan and the United States, it was clear that there are a lot of different permutations. They went from originally wanting to move 9,000 Marines to Guam, and then even the US EPA said, you're going to totally overwhelm the water system. There's just no way that this island can support that many Marines and their dependents. And so then they went to rotating through Guam on relatively term basis, and looking at moving some of those Marines and rotating them through Australia and Hawaii. Okay, and that was, all of these are permutations that should have been analyzed in an environmental impact statement to make an informed decision. None of that was done. But, so what we were pressing for in the lawsuit was, let's look at a reasonable range of stationing alternatives other than Guam. So why does it have to be Guam? In a modern world where you can deploy forces quickly by air, why are we going with this sort of 20th century thinking that Guam is the forward location? Why can't we have a smaller contingent that rotates through, and maybe Australia, maybe California, maybe Hawaii? I don't really wish it on any place, but if you're going to make a rational decision about where to station troops, you have to do it in a transparent way. You need to do it through an environmental impact statement so that the people have an opportunity to give input. The people have an opportunity to see what's going on. And eventually, if the people are not comfortable with the decision the military makes, the people need to be able to have that information to take it to elected officials. Now, the Navy, deprived us of all of that. And we still haven't seen the answer to the question, why does it have to be Guam? I mean, frankly, if you're concerned about North Korea, Alaska's closer than Guam is.
David holds a unique perspective as an environmental attorney who has litigated against the military for decades and has represented groups across the Marianas and Hawaii in matters related to the impacts of U.S. military projects on the environment. Currently, he represents the Sierra Club Hawaii in ongoing litigation surrounding the Red Hill water crisis, an environmental disaster and cautionary tale for Guahan as our community rallies in protection of our freshwater aquifer. David noted patterns by the U.S. military, including a lack of public trust, communication, and transparency.
Right around Thanksgiving, military families drinking the water out of the military's own water supply started turning on the taps in their kitchen, and it smelled like a gas station, and people were getting sick, and babies were getting rashes, and people were just feeling horrible. And still, the Navy command was telling their people the water's safe to drink. Don't worry about it. So the thing that was most upsetting was the lack of just common decency, really, to be straightforward with people.
While in Oahu, I joined a bus tour led by Oahu Water Protectors, a group on the front lines of the Red Hill water crisis. Also on the tour were members of Red Nation, a Native organization centered around the liberation of Indigenous peoples from colonialism, and Slow Factory, an environmental and social justice movement. On the way to the gate of the U.S. Pacific Fleet Command, Keone DeFranco, a lead organizer with Oahu Water Protectors, spoke about how the community's pleas to shut down the Red Hill fuel tanks continue to be disregarded by the Navy.
First recent spill happened in May of last year. Second spill happened in November of last year. And it did not become public knowledge until over a week after that November spill that there was petroleum in the water system. So that included Thanksgiving weekend when military families came and sat down, gathered and drank water that the Navy knew was fully contaminated, and then 1,000 people went to the hospital, and they had to come forward and give some kind of explanation because Department of Health and others were demanding what is going on here. That's the only reason we even know that this spill occurred. The May spill was not made public knowledge before that had happened. And so in early December, a coalition of Kanaka activists decided that something needed to be done. Red Hill is a difficult movement. There's nothing to physically block that impedes what's occurring. Unfortunately, we can't physically make the defueling happen any faster. So we have to use other political, and social media tactics. And so what was decided was to create a COA. And a COA is a form of spiritual gathering for the community to come together. And in this instance, to feed by water. And that is, we're feeding Kane here, Kane Kawai Ola, to give us that nourishment as a movement to continue to fight. And what was created there was a ki'i of Kane. And that is a wooden physical manifestation of him standing there, protecting us, and right at the front gate of the Pacific Fleet here. And so this aina here was chosen because it is state and county land, and it was a frontline activation. Activists came there that morning not knowing what was going to happen. Police were called in, and there was a conversation that occurred. And the police that arrived understood what was happening there and let it occur. And so that was in December of last year. Since then, there really has been no movement by the Navy at all. They've continued to stall, continued to make excuses.
At the gate, as a token of solidarity, I offered water from Guahan's northern coastline at Retidian, currently under threat from the establishment of a U.S. Marine live-fire training range complex. Navy security interrupted our visit to the COA.
It is state and county land, though.
But yeah, I'm just stating, okay?
Okay. Well,
The COA is you guys got to face it that way, and I can't be on camera.
But this is state and county land, right?
Yeah. But
Yeah.
you guys need
Okay.
to face your cameras that
Well,
way.
you can call the police so we can speak with the police.
But you guys need to face
You're not,
that way.
though. You work for the Navy, yeah?
Yeah, the Department of Defense.
Right, which is not the police of the state of the
You gotta
county.
go that way.
This is state of Hawaii land.
Yeah.
We're going to be leaving in a moment, but just to get jurisdiction down, you don't have jurisdiction here. You do not. You can call the police. We could have that conversation.
Captain Jeff Miller, Chief of Staff of the U.S. Navy Pacific Fleet Command, overseeing the Red Hill defueling efforts, also walked over to our group at the COA and exchanged words with Keone, who had the opportunity to remind the military that the water protectors are always watching.
Giving them an update.
You don't have the best one. Otherwise, you need anything?
Not today. We appreciate it. You have a good one. Yeah, yeah.
Always watching.
So are we.
While we were doing our pule and our prayer, initially, the chief of staff for the Navy at Pacific Fleet Command, Jeff Miller, came out. Someone that we've had discussions with in the past, who, at that moment, was one of those senior members in charge of the defueling of Red Hill. Came out to kind of check in on what we were doing. and kind of gave a side comment that he is basically monitoring our online presence and what we're up to. And that is something as an activist that isn't funny, and that we understand we're continually putting ourselves out on the line, fully exposed as civilians. But after that interaction, we continued with our pule. And following that, a security guard from the front of the base came out, basically telling us that we had to leave and we couldn't film in that area. But we had understood already from doing activation on that INA, on that occupied INA, that in this particular moment, while this is still sovereign Hawaiian Kingdom land, that this is also state and county land. And the Department of Defense doesn't just have jurisdiction to be able to do whatever they want. They have to follow the rules of law. And in that moment, he couldn't tell us to leave. And so we had an interaction in which I reminded him, you can't tell us to leave. If you want to do something, feel free to call the police, but we don't have to move because you're telling us to. And he followed up, we're the Department of Defense. We can do and say whatever we want. And we were just saying, you cannot. In this moment, you're wrong. Step away. We're going to do what we got to do. We're doing prayer here on our occupied land, and you got to go. And eventually he walked away. But it was one of those moments with so many activists from around the world together, just to show, the active military occupation of our land. While we are trying to do prayer and protection of water, we continue to get harassed on our occupied land on a daily basis. But that was a special and powerful moment to share together in solidarity.
The next day, I attended a community event at Thomas Square in observance of Laho'i Ea to commemorate the restoration of Hawaiian sovereignty and as a way to give voice to Hawaiian independence and issues surrounding militarization. While at the event, I met up with Joy Enomoto, a Kanaka Maoli activist who spoke on the importance of collective solidarity throughout the Pacific.
We know that the U.S. Navy, 93,000 people being poisoned by jet fuel is literally the equivalent number of of the displacement of Marshallese from nuclear testing. They don't care about poisoning 90,000 people. They don't care about displacing those people. In fact, I think that if the Navy had its way, it would literally, let the water be poisoned. And that would mean so many people would have to move and the military could do what it wants. So we need to not just the community, but not just Hawaii. Other people, other parts of the world need to show up for each other to stop this. Because if it's not here, where's that fuel going to go? It's going to go to Guam. It's going to go to Okinawa. It's going to go to other parts of the Pacific that are already over inundated by military activation. This constant state of military readiness means that we are always and particularly right now, there's just this posturing that is similar to the way that people postured toward Japan before World War II. It's a similar kind of buildup and threatening that happened, in my grandparents' generation, right? And it may not be that we go to war, but if we do go to war, we are the ones who are immediately affected, right? It'll be Hawaii as the head of as they say, the head of the octopus. We are going to be the most impacted. We will suddenly be under martial law. And not only that, so would Guam, so would Samoa, so would all these different, military occupied places that come under the U.S. And that includes the Philippines and even places that are supposedly not the U.S. left, right? The U.S. doesn't leave.
Kehaunani Abad, an organizer with Ka'ohiwai, a coalition of Native Hawaiian organizations rising in defense of Red Hill, was a panelist during a discussion on Red Hill at the sovereignty event. She noted similar patterns by the U.S. military across the Pacific.
I remember the day that it was a Friday, I think, and Ernie, who's our head of our Board of Water Supply, and he's been fighting this fight for a very long time. He came on the news and basically said that they're shutting down the wells that are tapped into this aquifer at Halava, and that he didn't know if we would ever turn them back on, and that it might not ever come back online again. And when he said that, and when everybody at work, we were all talking about it, we were all having the same reaction, I can't believe that just happen? Like, how could that happen? And you know, he and so many others had been fighting this for a long time, and we may never get that aquifer back. It might never come back online. And so the threat of that, yeah, it's devastating.
National security has never been about us. National security is about securing American interests and keeping the business lanes open. If this was about security, we'd have our water wouldn't be threatened. If this was about security, we wouldn't be so occupied. We're actually targets, right? So there's never been a real concern about Hawaiian security or national security. They allow false missile alerts. They allow all kinds of contamination. They bomb our sacred sites. This is not about national security. This is about a constant state of insecurity.
Fanuhutan zaunagi menitano Nafan hujung siha bobo Nafan hujung siha saduk Zan matan hanum.
Wow, that was really, really powerful. It's so sad to see the similarities that has happened with Guam and the Marianas and the No'os, and how these little islands are used for bombing practice. That's what has happened in Hawaii with our sacred site of Koho'olave, which had been bombed for 30 years by the military until the activists were able to go on the island while bombings was going on and force them to stop, among other things. And we've lost 2 lives as a result. But yes, those 30 years of bombing has stopped. However, the water table has been so damaged that there's no more fresh water on Kaho'olave. And the amount of cleanup in which it's supposed to be done is just a small, small fraction. So here we have a place that's on the National Registry, and it is a sacred site, and it's where the Kanaka Ma'oles did their worshiping, and they are no longer able to do that. Strangely enough, I don't know if it's strange, but it'd be nice to know that I learned that based on the statute regarding Kaho'olave with the cleanup, that land is supposed to be returned to the Native Hawaiians so that they can start their independence there on Kaho'olave. But without fresh water, how is that sustainable? How are they going to survive? It's already been damaged to that extent. It's been bombed so much that you can't. There's still a lot of unexploded ordnance there. And I'm afraid that this kind of history is what they're going to see in the Marianas Islands. And it's really sad that now they're moving that direction. So I hope that Earth Justice will, and the women in this lawsuit will be successful. And hopefully the damage will not be to the extent as in the Marshall Islands, Bikini Atoll, and so on and so forth. Okay, Dave, is there anything you wanted to add to that? We've got one more film.
No, you wrap it up, Melody.
Okay, so 6.9. Next, we are now going to hear from Dr. Michelle Lujan Bavacqua on the relationship of colonization and militarization on the people of Guam. Take it away.
Hafide.
Hafide.
My name is Michael Lujan Bavacqua from the Cabezas and Bitutug in Guam. I come from the Cabeza and the Bitut families on Guam. I am the curator for the Guam Museum. I am the co-chair for the decolonization outreach group, Independent Guam. I have a podcast that I produce called the Finatsu Podcast. I am a teacher of the language and culture of the Chamorro people in Guam and the Marianas. And it is an honor to be speaking with all of you today about the context in which we live in Guam today. And so across the Pacific, Guam's experience has traditionally been different over the past few centuries than other islands. Guam is one of the oldest islands to be formally colonized by Europeans several centuries ago. And like some of our brethren across the Pacific, we remain in a colonial status up until today. That while many different islands have moved on to a different political status, Guam remains, according to the United Nations, a non-self-governing territory, according to the United States, an unincorporated territory. And so Guam is a place, as you will see from other videos that are shared as part of this peace wave, it is a place in which you can see strongly the nexus of militarization and colonization. It is also a place, though, in which we push further and further, in which we are pushing more and more for there to be a stronger sense of demilitarization and decolonization as well. Not simply out of sort of a desire for justice, a desire to determine our own destiny, but in something which sort of can literally save these islands in an increasingly sort of dangerous world. And so Guam is a strategically valuable place for the United States. It is on the edge of Asia. Militarily, it provides so much value for the United States, simply being quote unquote American real estate on the edge of Asia against potential rivals or competitors for the United States. Guam's value, though, as a military site is enhanced as a colonial site in the sense that when you hear military commanders speak about what makes Guam valuable to US military interests, there's always twofold. There's always two things that are mentioned. One, it is on the edge of Asia. Simply look at a map. Two, compared with other bases in Asia, there is more freedom of movement. There is more strategic flexibility. And so this is where these two things, colonization, militarization, intersect to provide this enhanced value for Guam. As the late Secretary of Defense for the United States, Donald Rumsfeld, said, Guam provides so much. If it did not exist, we would have to create it, invent it. And so this is where we in Guam sit today, as the tip of America's spear. And for us on this island, it is a precarious situation because 1/3 of Guam's 220 or so square miles is US military controlled. We are a unincorporated territory, which means we do not get to vote for president. We do not have electoral college votes. We do not have a voting representative in the US Congress. We do not have a seat at the United Nations. We do not have the ability formally to make partnerships or negotiate with our island neighbors or with countries around us. Our existence is strongly defined by the limits of the federal government and the interests of the US military. And so this is why something decolonization and demilitarization are so vital, is that to live on an island on the edge of Asia, filled with US military weapons, hardware, and plans to increase it further, you realize that 1/3 of your island is not under the control of the limited local government. That the resources that are on those bases, whether it be the water in the ground, whether it be sort of the soil, the trees, the medicinal plants, even the historic properties, the bones of our ancestors are not within our control. And then that becomes amplified by the fact that we are a territory in which our voices are not supposed to matter, in which, in strategic military terms, the US military has more power here, less oversight from the federal government in the United States, less democratic oversight, less foreign interference. All of these come together to supercharge the strategic value of Guam. This is why decolonization and demilitarization must go together, because what we see in Guam is a case study in how colonization, how militarization takes away the basic rights of self-governance, the voice of the people who are affected most dramatically by the placing of bases, by sort of the projection of force, by the testing of weapons, that those who live in those areas, their voices are denied, and that, in the case of Guam, is part of its value. And so as we look across the world, as we look across the Pacific in particular, but we look across the world, we can see that more and more. In some places, it's clear and it's obvious. In other places, it's less pronounced. But there is this important nexus that in terms of broadening democratic freedoms, broadening the actual ability of your average person to have any control over what their country, the direction of their country, you have to combine these things, demilitarization and decolonization. And for us in Guam, it is literally sort of the future. It is our fate, in the sense that as the tip of the spear, the United States makes decisions for us based on the chess game that it is playing with other countries across the Pacific and across Asia and across the world. And we don't get to know what that strategy is. We don't get to decide that strategy. We don't get to decide if we want to opt out. We don't have a say. And so we in Guam stand in solidarity with all others who are in a similar predicament, who want their voices heard, who are shut out from these basic democratic, basic processes of self-governance. And so, agradece esta oportunidad para bekuntusiam. I appreciate this opportunity to speak to all of you. Sidus mase adios esta kimana lietal. Until we see each other again.
Dave?
No, Melody, you can, you have some parting last words here. You have about 10 minutes.
So 10 minutes, it is 10 minutes. Oh my goodness. Okay, well, I don't know if it's parting words. I just wanted to throw in more facts that's out there regarding the state of Hawaii and the militarization that's happening. As mentioned several times in some of these videos, there are 4 major military leases that are up for renewal in 2029. And one of them is Makua, a military reservation, which was discussed in one of the films. As discussed, these 4 leases were held since 1964, 65-year leases for $1. So that's not $1 per year, but $1 for 65 years. Now, I don't know how that is fair market value. How in the world did that happen? Anyway, it did happen. And as we have seen, the choices have been made whether we're going to rely on the economic benefit of having the military here at the detriment of the environment and the people, or shall we not have the military here and not have that economic benefit, and yet our environment and our children will thrive. Well, those that were in power at the time thought that having military here and making it the #1 spot with the Indo-Pacific Command right at our backyards would be the best thing for the islands. And as we have seen, that is not the case. So let me go through the 4 military leases that are up for renewal. That's 23,000 acres of state land at Pohakaloa training area, in which it is currently used for heavy live fire training. So a lot of this heavy live fire training moved from Oahu onto Pohakaloa. Some of you may have heard about Mauna Kea. Mauna Kea, that is a very sacred site as well. That's considered birthplace of Waikea, and that is the sky and the land and the beginning of all Hawaiian people. And some of the Kanaka Maoli even believe that it's a Garden of Eden and have actually been able to speak to Jesus Christ there. So it is very sacred, and they're trying to build the TMK 30-meter telescope on the highest point. Anyway, Waikoloa is below Mauna Kea. It is still part of Mauna Kea, and it is going through this heavy live fire training, 23,000 acres of state land. Back to Oahu, we have 4,000 acres at Puamoha training area, and that's in the Ko'olau Mountains, used for helicopter training. Then we have on the windward side where Dave and I reside, Kahuku training area. It's another 1,000 acres for helicopter training, large-scale ground maneuvers, and air support training. And as described earlier, Makua Military Reservation, another 4,000 acres there, currently being used for aerial drone training. Now, if these leases are not renewed, then the military will have to vacate 73 square miles of Hawaiian territory that contains several key training areas, military reserves, satellite tracking stations, and other facilities on the islands of Hawaii, Oahu, Kauai, Ni'ihau, and Maui. And it would reduce the military footprint by about 20%. So when you look at the detrimental effects that had happened as a result of Red Hill, 1,600 gallons of petroleum leaking on May 6, followed by 14,000 gallons of jet fuel leaking in November 2021, and the toxicity that had happened to our aquifer and the 93,000 people that were affected, and the risk of now 400,000 from Moanalua to Hawaii Kai really, really deteriorated any trust that the community has had on the military. So the renewals of these leases are subject to this distrust. But what we have learned, as they have spoken in one of the videos, saying that 27,000 comments in the EIS, this is in the Marianas Islands, it took that much. Even here, we've had our last EA on the consent, Administrative Order of Consent 2023, 1,700 comments in opposition. It did not change anything. The EPA Administrative Order of Consent continued on some changes, but not enough to really make an impact. It almost appears like the EPA, and to some extent the DOH, is leading the horse to water, opening the doors for the military to continue, because they are not using their enforcement arm as swiftly and as impactfully as they should. And what is a fine to the military? Nothing. So we have to understand that the goodwill of the military is what's causing the closure of Red Hill. So we have to just move along, do our community outrage, scream, shout, petition, do our protest, but it still boils down to the goodwill of the military, unfortunately. So thank you all. I think this has been a very, very good educational segment. And there's so much more that needs to be done. Dave, why don't you put in your comments as well?
Well, it's just the military is, the biggest part of our budget. 60% of their tax dollars are going to the military, and we're not at war. We have the military is prepared to fight 2 World War IIs at the same time. The last time we had to fight World War II was 1945. Complete waste of resources. As President Dwight Eisenhower said, every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies in the final sense a theft from those who are hungry, that are not fed, and those who are cold and are not clothed. This world in arms is not spending our money alone. It is spending the sweat of our laborers, the genius of our scientists, and the hopes of our children, and the future of our children. So thank you so much, David, for putting this on. And World Beyond War, you guys are amazing. Appreciate all the other presenters. from around the world. We're in solidarity with one another. Thank God for the internet. It's bringing people thousands of miles away, realizing that we're in solidarity and have the same fight for peace and justice that's with all our hearts, and that we all belong together as brothers and sisters fighting for our dear Mother Earth.
Thank you, David and Melody and Ann Wright for helping us put this together, and all the wonderful, brilliant people in the videos we've been watching for the past couple of hours. Terrific part 6 of our 12-part, 24-hour world around the world Peace Wave. And we're going to go to part 7, and we're 2 minutes early. I'm going to make Michelle the host of this little Zoom call. Michelle, are you here?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, I'm gonna make you the host and let you do the stopping and restarting and all that routine.
Aloha from Hawaii. Thank you, Ann Wright. We love you so much.
We love you, Anne.